Good afternoon, welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Pate. Today we're looking at the American Revolution, and our central question is, how are the American colonists able to overcome the massive advantages of the British Empire and triumph? So we're going to start looking at that, looking at the advantages each country or each group had. The British Empire had at the time 32,000 land troops that were exceptionally well trained and equipped and very experienced. They had a great navy with 10,000 naval sailors and a full-fledged navy that they were able to deploy to the effort. They had a stable, experienced government with a stable currency, a good economy, and really experienced being a war machine and knowing what war took to be successful. The American advantages: knowledge of terrain, commitment to the cause, passion to defend their own areas, and just a stubbornness to keep fighting. Eventually, guerrilla warfare and the style and strategy used by General Washington and the other generals, these things will all be advantages that the Americans had. Later on, of course, the French alliance would be the biggest advantage they have. Disadvantages for both sides. For the British, it's the communication gap. You know, you're talking several weeks for orders, for a report of how it's going on the ground to leave the North American colonies, go across the ocean, several weeks to come back, and now you're looking at, it's been over a month, the communication, or the situation on the ground is far different than what was relayed, and it just leaves the British Central Command, which should have been moved to the colonies, leaves them kind of behind. And so, yes, decisions are made by General Howe and these other leading generals, but really they're waiting for like a major overall plan coming from Britain that's too far behind what's happening in real time. Of course, this would not be a problem today. The nature of warfare is different. We're in an era of cell phones and satellite phones and an ability to use the internet and all kinds of other communication tools to instantly communicate and show what's going on. I mean, my goodness, we have drones that can give real-time feedback through satellites and stuff like that. This is not that time. There's no telephone, there's no telegraph. You're talking about people who write down things, it's taken on a ship, and then people read it, make decisions, write something down as new instructions, send it back, and then it goes into action 6 weeks later maybe. That's a big disadvantage. Disadvantages for the Americans, well, all those British advantages are their disadvantages. They do not have a navy. They do not have anywhere near the number of troops. They're poorly supplied, poorly equipped. They don't have a stable currency, a government experienced at being a war machine. They don't have very experienced officers. A lot of disadvantages. Now, one of the things I will say, though, is an advantage is, as the war goes on, their generals prove to be a little bit better in some ways. They are able to overcome these disadvantages and still win, and win significant battles, and then, of course, with the French help, to win overall when the battlefield stops being so tilted and is a little more evened out. Okay, so those are kind of the advantages and disadvantages, and again, no one would look at this as a rational observer and say the tail of the tape, so to speak, is, the Americans look like they're the favorites. Everyone in the world would have been like, they're going to get killed. Okay, British strategies. The British strategy, going back to kind of a European style of warfare, both armies would line up, they would try and outflank each other, do their strategies, one would force the other one into retreat, and at the end of a war, both sides' diplomats would meet in Europe, and there would be some concessions made by the one side. But a part of that is, if your army was able to take out a major city and occupy it, a major city of the opponent, you controlled like the radiating out countryside. Because of feudalism and the way cities had been built, you had the major city, and then radiating out from that you had small towns and villages and this kind of feudal system. So if you took out the central city, you controlled the whole surrounding countryside. The American situation is much more decentralized. In the South, there are a few major cities, very few. As a matter of fact, coastally, you only have a couple of significant cities and a few others that are more inland. There aren't many cities you can take. And due to the way that the Americans proceed to respond to the war and what the British do, when you even have major cities like Philadelphia or New York City or Boston, the Americans are going to just leave the city. Their army will go somewhere else and live to fight another day. So the New York, the British were expecting that taking out major cities would just collapse entire colonies or sections of colonies, and that's just not the case. It doesn't work that way. It's not quite the economic stranglehold and political dominoes that they had expected to fall there. Okay, so the British strategies, that's going to be kind of the first one that they use, is to occupy and retake control of major cities, and then they thought that would collapse all resistance efforts in that area, which it does not. We'll talk about the southern strategy a little bit later that the British use. The colonist strategies, they're going to use kind of a guerrilla warfare approach they learned from Native Americans in the French Indian War. They will basically come out, and this is exactly what you see in Vietnam, more recently with resistance after the fall of Iraq and the Iraq War. When you see that the enemy melts away at the scene of a battle, whether that's in a city or out in the middle of nowhere, the enemy is going to melt away and then live to fight another day. And they're not going to fight fair. They're going to be sneaky and hide and come and launch an attack. And in some ways, you have a battle of whose will is going to break first in the Revolutionary War. On the one hand, the Americans are hanging by a thread. They have some people that are loyalists and not that committed to the cause or opposing the cause. Some neutral people are loyalists. They have people who start deserting the army thinking we have no chance to win, this is a lost cause. And they don't have a good source of money, they don't have the diplomatic support, they have a very weak little provisional government coming out of the Second Continental Congress. You got a whole bunch of different things going on where American support at times flags. So some of the key victories for the United States are actually when it reinvigorates the morale of the Americans. But essentially the colonists, a lot of their strategy is endure, keep fighting, keep resisting, and eventually inflict enough blows to the British that the British give up. And this is what always is happening. This is what the North Vietnamese did in Vietnam War. This is what the Iraqi insurgents were doing. They're hoping they can inflict enough pain and misery and make it last long enough that the domestic public of the major power gets war weary and gives up. So here we go. We're going to now look at the key battles of the war and talk about those. So the first one we have is Bunker Hill. So switching over and looking at our map, Bunker Hill is, of course, right outside of Boston. I've labeled it with an A. It has a red star because it's a British victory. But it's a quasi-victory because the Americans take an elevated position. They're protected by kind of like a little modest rock wall, I guess you could call it, that they kind of develop, stacking some rocks. And they're able to shoot down at the British soldiers and keep repelling them and force them to retreat. And then the British attack in, force them to retreat. And then eventually the Americans are forced to retreat, which is how we tend to define a victory in war. The Americans retreat and take some casualties as they retreat, but only because they run out of ammunition. They could have stayed there all day if they had unlimited ammunition and forced the British retreat. The British senior leadership actually says, it was a dearly costing victory, and a few more of these and we'll be done. I'm paraphrasing there a little bit, but they basically say we can't afford to win with these kind of high casualties because it's over 1,000 versus 400, and a lot of the American casualties are when they have to escape and leave at the end of the battle with no ammunition left. So Bunker Hill, it's very significant because even though the British win, they become hesitant of launching a frontal attack. The Americans aren't doing what the Europeans do, which is march toward each other in a straight line. They're hiding with an elevated position saying, come and get us, and then blowing them away when they do. Well, that wasn't how they were used to fighting. The British have these nice white X's on their red uniforms giving a super target. And the British now, they're going to get hesitant about attacking. And on the one hand, they just firmly believe the colonist cause will collapse. So they're patient. General Howe is a patient guy. Okay? But on the other hand, they also become a little hesitant unless, again, that lack of familiarity with the terrain, a little hesitant to attack the Americans. So what's going to happen, we go next to the Battle of Long Island. And at Long Island, essentially, Howe has Washington's army cornered and has a chance to do a knockout blow and possibly in the Revolution, right there. And yet, coming out of the Bunker Hill experience, he's going to be hesitant to attack. worried that there might be some surprise up Washington's sleeve, and then fog rolls in, Washington's able to escape, live to fight another day, and really, that could have been that chance that slipped away. It's kind of like the team leading in a basketball game, and they have a couple free throws to ice it, and they miss the free throws, and then the other team comes back and pulls off a miraculous victory. Well, that's exactly what happened in the Battle of Long Island. This is an opportunity slipping through their hands. So that makes it very significant. Even though it's a British victory, is it really? Okay. Trenton and Princeton. Well, by the winter of 1776, 1777, the American cause and morale were flagging badly. And now what you're going to see is Trenton and Princeton. You're essentially going to see that Washington is going to launch a surprise attack. And this surprise attack, he's going to defeat a Hessian army right after Christmas, and then a British army on New Year's. And these are both kind of partied out groups. They're surprise attacked. There's a famous, totally fictional, but famous portrait of Washington crossing the Delaware River related to this action going on. But what it's going to do is give the United States some more supplies, a little more credibility. It's going to raise the morale of troops who are close to being able to just unenlist because their time of service would be up. It leads to more troops joining. They don't lose those other soldiers. Citizens believe more in the cause and keep supporting it. So it's a morale-raising victory in central New Jersey for the Americans. Saratoga. Now this is the key turning point of the French alliance. Oh, but I better back up for a second. So the overall early British strategy, before I get to Saratoga, was to occupy these northern major cities, reinstitute Loyalist control, because the Americans, after basically the Declaration is being issued, and of course, Lexington and Concord was on our previous video as kind of like right at the lead into the war. Second Continental Congress recommends every state basically form a state government and begin operating as a state. So when the British come in and take out these major cities in the north and occupy them, they reinstitute Loyalist control. Couple of problems here for the British. They are thinking when they reinstitute Loyalist control, Loyalists will be able to, along with British Army support, reinstitute control and roll through and just kind of maintain control. Problems. Number one, the British are very harsh in their treatment of everybody and very suspicious of everybody. So, on the one hand, you have some instances where the British are going to actually, they're going to basically turn off some Loyalists who become patriots. Another problem that's going to occur is that the Loyalists are all outed. They essentially are now well known as, hey, I don't know what that person's loyalties are. Nope, they are Loyalists. Well, when the British Army then leaves, the majority population will turn on and attack these Loyalists, often forcing them to flee. So while they're camped in these areas, Washington is quite happy to stay somewhere in the outskirts, to stay out in the country, and avoid a decisive loss. That's the goal. The British, in their strategy, ultimately want knockout blows, take out major cities, and a direct defeat of Washington's major armies. The Americans want to be, it's kind of George Foreman, big guy, just knockout blows. The colonists want to be more like Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. They want to stick around, out-endure the British, and keep inflicting, smaller jabs and blows, and force eventually the giving up or defeat of the opponent. Well, what you're going to see is when they leave these major northern cities and move to their next strategy, the southern strategy, the Loyalists are going to be persecuted and attacked. The Loyalists give up. The state governments of the colonists are going to be reinstituted. And this effort's a big failure, which, like I said, even turned some Loyalists against the cause. Okay, so that's early British strategy of kind of occupy major cities in the north and try and get a decisive big blow victory against the colonists. All right, Saratoga in New York is the turning point battle, and it results in the French alliance. And essentially what happens is you have an early coordination, and this better than any battle demonstrates the communications problems that just wouldn't be there today in the cell phone age. You have a coordination plan that they're going to triangulate a northern American army and take it out. And they have two armies. They're going to come from different directions from in northern Canada, and then you're going to have also coming from the south, you're going to have coming out of Massachusetts another army led by Howe. Well, you have Saint Leger, you have Burgoyne, and you have Howe. Howe finds something else. He hears reports and decides to go attack it for a different army. He abandons the chase and goes a different direction. So one of the three prongs of triangulation is gone. Benedict Arnold is going to stop Saint Leger in western New York. And so now you have Burgoyne. He's going to get stuck, and now he actually is going to be defeated by an American army. This is very significant. You had significant victories at Trenton and Princeton, but this is a massive victory, a huge British surrender, tons of equipment, tons of supplies that the Americans can get, and this shows the Americans aren't winning small battles, the Americans can win a decisive battle. And the French have been sitting on the sidelines, smarting since, remember, a long time, centuries of being enemies. They've been sitting on the sidelines, smarting, just irritated, bitter about their loss in the French and Indian War. And so they're all wanting to jump in now that the Americans have proved some credibility. French alliance is going to be super significant because it's going to give the colonists money. They get hard currency gold to back up their currency, okay, and make their dollars, which had kind of flagging rag money, lack of value. It's going to reinvigorate that. They give them supplies, equipment, French armies, French navy, and this is going to be a shot in the arm that really makes this more of an even battle. And the French alliance is eventually going to bring in other countries such as Spain that are, Europe was all about balance of power politics. So if one country looked too superior and great, all the other countries would kind of gang upon them. You'll see this in a little bit with Napoleon a few years from now as we study into the Jefferson years. This kind of, whoever's the top dog, everyone else, balance of power, tries to bring them down so no one becomes too fearful and great of a power. Okay, so we have Saratoga up here, which is a colonist American victory. So then the British turn to the Southern strategy. And essentially this is, they try to, again, kind of occupy and economically strangle an area and reinstitute Loyalist control. And the South is friendlier territory, Anglican Church, originally, historically, more royal colonies. More of the deep seeds of rebellion have been here, so they say, well, let's make this a stronghold for us. So they are going to go to Savannah, Georgia, and they're going to defeat a very costly victory. Thousands of soldiers in the U.S. Army are going to be defeated, and they're going to control Georgia, or at least coastal areas of Georgia. South Carolina, you're going to have Charleston have the exact same thing happen. And so now they're starting from the south, because remember, Florida is Spanish territory, it's not U.S. So they're going to be working their way up on coastal cities trying to take over. Well, we get to the final battle in 1781, which is Yorktown. And essentially what's going to happen with Yorktown is you're going to have the colonists win. Why do they win? They have a French army and an American army that are going to surround Cornwallis's army. And then they also have the French Navy with Admiral de Grasse that is going to plug basically the Chesapeake, and it's going to be able to fight off the British who are coming to help Cornwallis escape. And essentially when he can't escape and he's being bombarded by the French Navy, he's being attacked by multiple American and French armies, he has to surrender a huge British force. Now, at the time this is going on, now you have several major victories for the Americans, although they're not winning all of the battles, but support at home. Some of the Whigs, which were more of a civil liberties type of political party, other than the Tories who were more conservative, the Whigs, some of them are saying, why shouldn't they be independent? You have the debt going up. All of this started because the British, as we saw in the last video, tried to eliminate debt by raising revenue and, constricting their control more over the colonies. So you have some sympathy for the Americans in Britain, even in Parliament. You also have war weariness of the whole British population. They just want to be done. So the leading prime minister, his ministry collapses, and basically the king brings in someone new, and they eventually agree to peace. Now, why are they willing to go to peace in the Treaty of Paris? Because it's not just about what's happening here. The French and Spanish are attacking other possessions, and now, at some point, the British government says, we can't win this. But we don't want to lose Gibraltar near Spain. We don't want to lose some of our Caribbean colonies and other places. So they're determined to hold on to their other possessions. This results in the Treaty of Paris, and that helps us answer our question. They were able to overcome these massive advantages through guerrilla warfare, through fighting a different style of warfare where the central cities and control of those wasn't as important, through getting the French alliance, and through basically determination of will. And that's all the time we have for today. Stay classy.